we are building a church for the lost, the lonely, the broken, and the hurting. In the opening chapter of his book, What's So Amazing About Grace, Philip Yancey describes a true story of a prostitute who's telling a horrific story to a worker with Chicago's Down and Out. And when this worker suggested to her that she should give church a go, her response was, "Church? Why would I ever go there? I was already feeling terrible about myself. They'd just make me feel worse." Now, when I first read that, I felt both convicted and saddened. Sad that anyone would feel that way about church, but convicted because I knew that I was part of the church. It was my behaviour which contributed to church being a place where people felt that they needed to clean themselves up beforehand in order to attend. And yet when I read the Gospels, I got a very different impression of Jesus. Prostitutes would flock to be with Jesus. If you wanted to find Jesus, your best bet would be to find the lost, the lonely, the broken and the hurting, because he would be there amongst them. The sinners, the ragamuffins, that's where Jesus could be found. The gospel message is for everybody. Jesus is for everyone. We mustn't judge the person that turns up to church in a £100,000 car, just as we shouldn't judge the person who turns up to church with slightly difficult personal hygiene because they haven't had access to a shower that day or even that week. The fact is, we tend to default into judging both extremes, which is why perhaps that people from those extremes aren't packing out our churches. Rather, we seem to specialise in PLUs, people like us. It's more comfortable that way. It's easier. But when I feel safe enough in church to leave my handbag unattended, securing the knowledge that it will be where I left it when I return, then I know that church is not reaching the people that it needs to be reaching, and something has to change. In the parable of the wedding banquet, all the PLUs and the respectable people were invited, and guess what? They were too busy with work and stuff and engagements and social stuff, family commitments. They all turned the invitation down. So Jesus carries on the story saying, he said to his servants, "The wedding banquet is ready, but those I invited did not deserve to come. So go out to the street corners and invite to the banquet anyone you can find." So the servants went out into the streets and gathered all the people they could find, the bad as well as the good, and the wedding hall was filled with guests. So I acknowledge the challenge to be a church that goes out of the way to include others from the highways and the byways out in the world. Who do you see out there? And what would our church look like if the invites truly went out to all? Addicts, homeless, people who don't know how to behave in church, the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender community who feel so rejected by so many. Shouldn't they be accepted and loved in church? And who would you say is the modern day equivalent of tax collectors and prostitutes? Tax collectors and prostitutes, maybe. Jesus also said, when you make a dinner or a supper, don't call your friends, nor your brothers, nor your kinsmen, nor rich neighbours. He's talking about PLUs. Or perhaps they might also return the favour and pay you back. But when you make a feast, ask the poor, the maimed, the lame, or the blind, and you will be blessed, because they don't have the resources to repay you. For you will be repaid in the resurrection of the righteous. The founder of the Vineyard, a man by the name of John Wimber, had a passion for evangelism and would go door knocking every evening when he wasn't running Bible study groups, talking to people about Jesus. Many came to faith, so many that the congregation of his Quaker church in California doubled in size with people who were all there as a result of Wimber leading them to Jesus. He describes one Sunday morning a little old lady confronting him, visibly upset, tears streaming down her face. "You've ruined my church," she said to him. He looked at her and he started crying with her. He gave her a hug and with compassion said, "You people brought me in and looked after me. What could I do? Leave the others out there? Or tell them about Jesus and bring them along?" When asked to describe the function of church, Wimber came up with what's now become known as the Vineyard Man. Although we've changed it to Vineyard Vera to make it more personal and inclusive. The body of Vera, the church, is summarised as family, school, army and hospital. In each of those there is an element of weakness and vulnerability, perhaps even of mess. With hospital, it's obvious. People come to Jesus with the wounds of life. They carry these into church with them. Sometimes it's a bit of healing just here and there that's needed. Sometimes it's an awful lot of healing. And it's interesting how we tend to go through seasons of healing as well. But I find that when you first encounter the love and the grace of Christian community, it very often takes you straight into a healing season. How many times have we encountered people crying when they experience worship for the first time, for instance? So we're in a hospital, a place where Jesus and the spiritual family bring healing in the power of the Holy Spirit. It's also an army, which of course brings wounding of its own as we fight the good fight. It's a family, because those families can be a little bit messy sometimes, can't they? And a school. And what do you do at school? You learn. And how often do you learn by making mistakes, or by trying stuff out, giving things a go? All this is to say that we really need to ditch the idea of cleaning ourselves up and sorting ourselves out before we come through the door on a Sunday morning. We need to ditch the tradition of church being a respectable place, where we have on our best Sunday suits and our Sunday best smiles are in place. We want to have a church that reflects the Jesus that we read about in the Gospels. We need to be prepared for a bit of mess, some realness, with each other and with ourselves. The challenge of reaching out and getting to know people who are different to you, who perhaps don't fit the Christian stereotype. Those who might need some extra helpings of grace. We are building a church for the lost, the lonely, the broken and the hurting. In the same way that people were drawn to Jesus because of his love and his scandalous grace, I want ours to be a church where people are drawn by our love and the scandalous grace of God which abounds. So go out into the highways and byways and invite anyone you can find. The time for the wedding feast is fast approaching and we don't want anyone to miss out.